Hey guys, welcome back. Today we have a really good video. We're talking to Tomer Israeli. So you might know him from his training videos. He's very popular. So basically this guy is an IDF Special Forces veteran. He was in the Shin Bet, which is Israeli's like secret Secret Service or FBI kind of thing. He's also the lead instructor of the Israeli Tactical School. He trains Special Operations Forces, Capitol Police, U.S. Marshals, all types of really high-level people. So this is going to be a really good talk. Make sure to like and subscribe to this. As well, you can see all of our other talks in the description. I'll have a link to the playlist. And definitely check out our podcast, which is coming out. And I'll have a link to that below if you just want to hear just the audio, you know what I mean? Anyway, let's go ahead and get this video started. Thanks. Tomer, I appreciate you coming on today. You have history, Special Forces with the IDF, the Shin Bet, a bunch of different things, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, I live in Maryland now. For the last 10 years, I'm in the United States. I came here as a government employee, and I served in what you call the State Department of Israel. I worked in the embassy, did security over there. The regular stuff, some executive protection of the dignitaries of the embassy, and field security, physical security, basic stuff, nothing interesting. After the embassy, basically I opened Israeli Tactical School, so you probably know me from that role. And we provide the training. We try to do it as close to the source as possible, and try to avoid fancy stuff just to have them. You know, it's more like hardcore combat training with no excuses. So you're gonna find you can train in our company doing basic stuff, but it's all towards the goal to do advanced stuff. So we don't train you. We try not to train just to get people the fundamentals. The fundamentals are only the tip of the iceberg of the offering, and eventually the programs are built up layer by layer to get you to a very interesting level.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
I've been seeing some of the people you're training too. You're training, U.S. Special Forces, Capitol Police, U.S. Marshals, a ton of different really awesome people. So it's very impressive.
Yeah, it's not better than other approaches for training.
Mm-hmm.
You have amazing institutes here that provide training in the highest level. We try to give the Israeli angle.
Mm-hmm.
The way we do things at times is different but it works for us. There are 1,000 ways to cut a cat's skin. They told me this is an expression common in America. So it's geared to the same results, but it's a little bit different, maybe odd for some people. But this is it.
Well, that's one thing I've always noticed about Israeli methods on things is like, from the outside looking in, it looks unusual, but at the same time, it's really effective. Whatever you guys do is really effective, but it just looks weird. You know what I mean?
Like, it looks weird, and I personally receiving lots of jokes and critics from people. Some of them are not so easy to digest, but with the years, like Donald Trump was saying, there's no bad marketing, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. No marketing is bad marketing.
Something like that.
It doesn't matter if it was horrible. But yeah, no, that's the thing. It's like one thing I've really had a lot of respect for Israel coming up because, I'm watching them and I'm saying, okay, these are the only guys. They're stuck there in the Middle East, surrounded by all these enemies. They fight them. You know what I mean? Like 6 Days War. they'll fight like everybody around them and win. It's so crazy to me, and
Yeah.
that's why I have a lot of respect for the military and a lot of the different forces, Mossad, especially Operation Wrath of God, different stuff like that. Really interesting and really effective stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you and disagree because I see things from different perspectives sometimes than other people from the outside. But maybe it's a topic for another conversation. But definitely experience and problems with enemies. It's what led Israel to, and this is maybe interesting historical angle. Terrorism or counter-terrorism, it's a number one country necessity.
Yeah.
So if I'm comparing to America, you have other problems than terrorism.
Yeah.
You have other problems. You're a big nation, superpower. The threats are different. We are a small country in the middle of an island in the middle of a very problematic neighborhood.
Yeah.
So terrorism can devastate Israel just like that. It's a number one problem and led to the Israeli Defense Forces, no matter what they are, to develop effective tactics and approach to counter-terrorism to survive. And if I compare America to America, we put our best resources, recruit the best people. In Israel, to be in defense forces is probably number one choice of a high school graduate. Compared to maybe in America. So I'm not saying you don't have good people in your defense forces, but on the population scale, if you try to measure, I think it's very interesting that really high quality people goes to the system.
That's
the first priority. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So culturally, you're saying culturally, a lot of the people don't want to be, doctors or whatever. They want to be in the IDF. They want to do these different things. Like you were in the special forces in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? That sounds awesome.
So I started in Sayeret Matkal. Sayeret Matkal is Israeli Delta Force.
Okay.
Unlike in America, to Israeli Delta Force you can join after high school.
Okay.
So it's not a progression in the career from, let's say, the 75th Rangers to the Delta Force or something in that sort, or Green Beret. Also, the service is different. You serve for minimal time, basically 4.5 years out from high school. So eventually the warriors in the unit are not, I cannot compare them to, Team 6 or Delta Force operators in America that stays for 20 years, 15 years in service, active service. So it's different agenda. I was there for 1 year, and after that I was joining another unit that more geared to recon for division, where I stayed also for 15 years as reserve officer. So I was also a team leader, captain in the Defense Forces of Israel.
And that was Golani, Sayeret Golani?
Right, so Sayeret Golani is basically Orev Golani. It's another unit that now not exists anymore.
Okay.
In that topic, so now it's called Sayeret Golani. This is a recon unit for a brigade that gives, basically the recon unit that gives services to the brigade, in the brigade level.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the other unit I served. And there is another unit I served as an officer, also later for 15 years, basically team leader for recon that gives services to the division level. So it's a little bit different, more long distance recon, more interesting maybe than infantry recon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds like an awesome job to have, especially with the Israelis. Well, one thing I was wondering is, did you guys ever run any contingencies with USSF or anything like that, or was it kind of like you kind of just doing your own thing out there?
You know, I feel it should be much more.
Yeah.
It on the surface, it looks like Israel and America have lots of amazing relationship of allies, but it's usually in the diplomacy level or headquarter level. Regular soldiers, there is very rare training collaboration between regular units and Special Forces of America, although our Delta Force and Navy SEALs and other units train with Special Forces from America all the time. So in the elite, in Tier 1 units, such as your Delta Force and our Delta Force, yes, and SEALs, yeah, we do have, there is a program for collaboration, let's put it that way. It's not sporadic, it's not spontaneously, it's on the calendar.
Right, so you're saying that the contingency is usually with diplomats and some of the top tier 1 type guys, but in general, like regular infantry isn't going to be working contingently with Israelis as much.
Yeah, because it's you want basically to share knowledge, and there is a share of knowledge, natural share of knowledge between the elite and the bottom. Okay, in Israel, so we basically want you to experience our best people and expose yourself to our best tactics, probably, and vice versa. And then if that unit decides to, it's very interesting what you're doing here in Delta Force, let's try to do what you do. Eventually, it may also dissolve in the system under the Tier 1, like to Tier 2 or 3, etc. So I think this is the logic.
Very interesting. So you were Special Forces, IDF, all that, and then you got selected to be in the Shin Bet. One thing I wanted to ask about the Shin Bet is, what is the American equivalent? Is FBI, Secret Service? Because I've heard so many different things about the Shin Bet. No one can really nail it down 100%.
Yeah, so first of all, I cannot say anything about the Shin Bet beyond what it's public, how you say it, public exposed
knowledge.
already, public knowledge. Shin Bet, it's an intelligence agency that focus on counter-terror. Counter-terror is prime. So it's responsible to give these services domestically, inside Israel and outside of Israel. Okay. There is like a protocol how to do it outside of Israel, so it's not so obvious because we also have the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency for outside of Israel. And we have also the IDF, the Army of Israel, that also does intelligence with the enemies, right? So it's basically, there is like parallel work over there, and there is a protocol to deal with it. But besides the counter-terror, Shin Bet also responsible for protecting the symbols of Israel. Okay. So there is also a security role for the Shin Bet, that it's a security. So it's not just counter-terror, interception of terrorists or disable networks of terrorists. It's also protecting these assets. And one of the assets, for example, is our prime minister.
Okay, so Netanyahu or...
Yeah, so basically, like in America, so basically if you try to look at America, which you have so many agencies, so it's really hard to track you guys. We're actually quite simple. We are, I think in my point of view, maybe I'm mistaken here a bit, but we are like the FBI and US Secret Service together.
Okay. Yeah, because that's what it sounds like, because it seems like you're focused on domestic stuff, but then also, you know, you do some contingency outside worrying about yourselves, and then also you're protecting the leader. So yeah, that's a good analogy. Like you guys are both kind of put together. A lot of
Yeah.
countries do stuff like that, similar to that.
Right. So this is what we do, and yeah. But if you look at the majority, the most important stuff that the organization focus on, it's more like the FBI when it comes to deal with counter-terror.
Okay.
So criminal activities is not something that Shin Bet wants to do or prepare to do. So if you take the counter-terror aspect of the FBI and you join with the U.S. Secret Service, you probably get what you want. The similarities are there. Yeah.
Cool. Very interesting. It's a shame you can't speak more about it, but that's all right. We're used to that. No one can really speak about these things.
I cannot, yeah. But,
But
there
that's no
is so much information out there.
Yeah.
So you don't need me.
So, okay, so you got out. You were with the Shin Bet at the embassy in Washington D.C., and then you got out. You started your training. Some of the training courses you got surveillance, counter surveillance, bodyguard, executive protection, counterterrorism training, where you guys are like flying with helicopters, running through. Some of the stuff I've seen you guys do in the shoot house is crazy. Very complex maneuvers, and with live training rounds, everything, and very, very serious stuff. So tell us a little bit about that. Very interesting.
Yeah, so more than me talking about it, I think people, the viewers, if they're interested, they can look to our website. There are some videos, examples, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. They see basically the evolution of Israeli Tactical School from scratch, like a glance over 7 years of training operation. Yeah, it's exactly what you mentioned. I think what distinguishes Israeli Tactical School from other schools worldwide is dealing with live fire as primary.
Mm-hmm.
The concept of using firearms with live fire is critical, of course. It's the real deal. There's no comparison, unfortunately. You cannot compare UTM, FX ammunition, meaning the substitute for live fire to live fire, because the students simply get used to, since they're not doing live fire, they start to use habits of safety that with live fire you're not going to do. We're not going to take the risks with live fire the same you take with UTM. So in my opinion as an instructor, and it's of course my small opinion, okay, I think the methods that we are using in our school, and by the way, I'm not inventing, in the Israeli, all the agencies I was serving at will prefer live fire over any other methods as primary. So this is what makes a big difference between us and other methodologies or way of doing training.
Yeah, training.
Of course, we do also force on force. We do UTM. We do simulation, but only after the student is really there, really understand everything. And then we want him to open up to the tactical level, meaning understanding what the enemy can do to him, flank him, tactics. And the moment it's happening, it can open up to understand the tactical level when the fundamentals are already there. Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting because, watching some of your videos, and we'll have a link below to your YouTube, to your website, everything, so people can take training for themselves. But it's very interesting because I see when you guys are running through the shoot houses, live fire, you guys are touching each other's shoulders, you guys are communicating the whole entire time. So I really like what you guys are doing, and you guys are doing it the right way. And it looks great too, especially when you put it all together and run through it. It looks awesome. And a lot of the stuff, I'm just like, wow, this is, you know what I mean? This is really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about specifically, and I don't know, I mean, our viewers might like this, but specifically for me, I was looking into maybe doing one of these counter surveillance courses. It seems like it would be a pretty cool thing. So, like, what are some counter surveillance tips that you can think of, and what are some things that maybe you'll go over in that course if we decided to do it?
So basically, the world of counter surveillance, there is lots of names for it. Okay, counterintelligence, counter surveillance, attacker point of view, espionage game, James Bond. There is a PI, investigator training, all this world of surveillance, if you want. It's actually was undervalued, in my opinion, when it comes to real life training. People like to shoot, they like to do hand-to-hand combat. Sometimes they like to do it both together. They understand the value of combining live fire and hand-to-hand combat together. This is also something that we do in all of our courses. In CQB, when you deal with close quarter combat, at times you cannot use the gun. There is no place for it because of a problem or simply a bad. When Murphy's Law hits you in CQB, it usually kicks you in the balls. So, pardon my French. So to use hand-to-hand combat is very relevant. Now, when I'm talking about counter-surveillance, when I tell you it's undervalued, because people don't understand, it's not sexy. They see a person with watching a window, okay, or watching... or with a cover story as homeless, maybe, try to understand the routine of an objective. In the more advanced level, counter surveillance or surveillance maybe use cover story to get and blend in events, live events, come on a cover story and penetrate places. So these things are maybe more sexy, but what you see eventually, you see in every James Bond movie also, right? And so what is to do with that and with security or protection? Mm-hmm. Okay, the linkage between the James Bond and protection is not obvious. James Bond is the attacker. How could it be that James Bond tactics could serve you in a protection? And I think... and this is a word about the protection as a topic, as a profession. Sun Tzu, I want to use the words of bigger people than me. There are many of them, so it's very easy to do. Sun Tzu, the Chinese general, was saying, once avoiding the fight, it's like winning the fight. Okay, not to go to battle, it's like winning the battle. Okay, so this is something interesting that he was saying. Another phrase from him, and it's my interpretation, of course. I'm not quoting him. It's if you see that you're not going to win the fight, okay, don't go to fight. If you see you're not going to win the fight, don't go to fight. This is very important because I can prove to you in a second why the attacker will win you with even the best training in the world, shooting training, okay, or hand-to-hand combat. I can prove in a second why you are dead already or neutralized. You and your VIP, let's say, if I'm protecting your VIP. Mm-hmm. The simple answer is simply reaction time. The moment you see the gun, it's already too late.
Right.
If the enemy pull his gun at you, he's already shooting you, and it will take you a few seconds to, maybe short seconds, to react. By the time it's happening, your body will be full of lead.
Right. And
your VIP, if is the objective, will be probably in priority. So you are by definition late. And when you by definition late, it's very important to prevent the conflict. And this is where counter surveillance, it's probably the most critical topic you're gonna ever learn from me, let's say, or from the instructor or the school. It's more like if I want to put the weight, okay, to emphasize how important the topic is, I would say that you should be able to do 90% prevention. Okay, put 90% of your resources on prevention.
Sure.
And of course, we need to be able to react also. But the reaction, these sexy movies, room clearing, live fire with 2 agents or 5 or 7 with vehicles and all very impressive. This should be 10% from the focus. Okay, so we focus on that. We focus on prevention. There are stuff we cannot share on this video that I'm doing after due diligence. I'm doing with students that we go to details about prevention, because eventually prevention tactics are also are sensitive, because the moment you give the enemy your vulnerabilities, you find a way to go around them. But we really, if I want to keep it general speaking, we really go and understand the attacker point of view. First of all, we are teaching you to be attacker, doing surveillance yourself with cover story and everything.
Okay.
Understand it to the not too deep, but understand enough to know what are the vulnerabilities of the attacker when he does attack in the surveillance mode.
Okay, so you teach them to conduct surveillance before you
we're
teach them
doing
to be
surveillance, and we're doing undercover surveillance, and we
Okay.
do it with games, field exercises.
Okay.
So it's not BS. Pardon my French again. It's not like conducting PowerPoint presentations for the whole day and tell you how good I am and how Rambo with surveillance I am, and and tell you stories from my service in Lebanon. This is not the focus. The focus is to take the student and get him to experience himself working a cover story. We engage the student with games, espionage games, all kinds of creative games that they need to adjust to situations. He needs to find a way to convince people to do something they not necessarily planning to do with the student. So we also giving a window to the world of manipulation.
Okay.
And now when he understands how to be an attacker a bit, we're teaching how to use these understandings to expose the attacker weaknesses as protection agent, if you want. So this is very big ideas. There's no sexy video to show you,
Right.
but the seminars are very, very formative, very interesting. Some of them even describing the seminars as life-changing seminars. They realize how vulnerable they are to manipulation, how vulnerable for gather information of them physically, not cyber-wise, which is of course
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's awesome. So like when you're doing surveillance and counter surveillance, like let's say for instance, you're doing mobile surveillance in vehicles, you're doing foot surveillance, you guys are doing changeovers, you have command operators, backing operators, or reverse operator or reserve operators, and so you guys are doing changeovers. How many people do you guys usually have within a team? Do you guys do like 3-person team, 3-car team, 5-car, or is it just like 1 or 2? What do you guys usually do with that?
So the field exercises for tracking and avoid tracking, right? This is what you're trying to say here.
Yeah.
It's part of the surveillance work. It's not just tracking people, but it's also manipulation games, as I mentioned before. That it's another layer. It's a little bit more deep, deep knowledge, I think, when you try to come with a cover story. And let's say break into the office of the CEO in the building that you're working in, okay, let's say, open the fire alarm of the building, engage the button, everybody evacuate from the building, and I'm attaching a USB to the laptop of the CEO and maybe infecting the laptop or get an access to the hard drive. I have enough time to work in the office on the laptop of the CEO. And now I'm become part of his laptop forever, let's say, until he changes the laptop. So this is also something that we do in surveillance, as a topic in the attacker point of view. So we have extensive workshops that just go through scenarios and field exercises to get access to hotel keys or car keys with manipulation, do penetration, of course, all legal, okay? We're creating, it's all very important to understand. We're creating a scenario that we are the role players also, okay? So it's not like we attack real people, but the student does all of these things, also involve manipulation. Important to understand, I think. Now, what you mentioned before, how to track a person with a car or on foot.
Yeah.
Yes, we do one-on-one, and we do also 2 people against 1 and 4 people against 1.
Okay.
And we simulate, for example, that let's say I'm tracking you, and you're doing a mission that I'm not aware of. What are you doing, right? I'm just following you, and then I see you doing a matchup with a person on the street that looks discreet, but still something like exchanging a note, give him a package, leave something next to a trash can or in a trash can for someone to pick it up later. So all kinds of espionage games.
Dead drops, all that.
Yeah, so basically you as a student can experience yourself understanding what are you looking for as a surveillance when you track a person. You need to actually tell the story. You need to understand exactly what the guy is doing. It's very important.
Understand exactly what they're doing. Would you, now, in a situation like that, would you, like, let's say if you have 4 surveillance operators and he leaves a dead drop, would you pull off a couple surveillance officers to follow the dead drop and see what goes on with that, and then have another, you know what I mean?
Yes, of course,
so you split
of course.
Up. Okay.
The option opens up, right? The moment, let's say I met you, and I was the objective, and the guys that follow me saw you, now they're opening objective, they need to know who the hell are you. So basically I can expose more links in the chain, logistic chain of, let's say, the criminals I'm tracking or terrorists, So it's become, it's like espionage games. Now, if you combine this physical surveillance and counter surveillance, okay, with the world of technology, and I'm not just saying cyber, okay, it could be also to listen to the frequency of a garage door, okay? It doesn't have to be cyber, right? It could be an RF signal that I'm listening from, just in order to know the code, to open your garage. Or when we try to combine it also with cybersecurity, like the example I mentioned with the fire alarm. So I'm using physical access to gain cyber access to objectives. When you do that in a protection seminar, it's really important, because this is how the attacker will attack you really. It's not going to be the guy with the, Arabic Bedouin and the big mustache, Mustafa, mustache, cow with Kalachnikov and say Allahu Akbar. It's going to be probably what we call in the philosophy of the surveillance, he try to attack you in the place that you don't know what hit you. You don't know what you don't know. You've been hit already, you have no idea. Okay, this is the place that I want the security people to live. This is the ecosystem that I want the protection agent to be, in order to understand he actually very vulnerable, and there are different ways of getting access to his sensitivities without even he knows about it, okay? Mm-hmm. This is the mind game. This is where the experience takes you, okay? This understanding. A very important workshop. I think it's a life-changing workshop for protection people. People consider themselves professional in the world of security. In any level. It doesn't have to be CIA people or FBI or even estate security can benefit from that. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's change gears a little bit. Where I've seen, I've been seeing you online, and it seems like you train in a lot of very interesting places. What are some of the most interesting places that you've done training seminars for and different stuff like that? What are some of the most interesting places you've been?
The places, I've been in places, but I think the people is the most interesting stuff in my profession. The people that you engage. I think different cultures. Yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know, every place is amazing. To go to train in Texas, to meet ex-Blackwater, people, train them to do some the Israeli ways and with all the criticism, and eventually to get a feedback that they actually really love what we're doing, and it's opened the world, so it's more like the engage of cultures, okay? The Israeli culture with other culture, I think it's really what makes my job interesting. But I train, for example, we have a nice video about it also that I can share, okay? We trained the King of Thailand commando unit. It's like his special unit for basically, if you want, joining the protection operation.
Like Secret Service type guys.
They call themselves the FBI.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this was very interesting training that we did some advanced stuff together. There are other countries. I was in China, in Shanghai. I know Americans don't like to train the other side, but it was a SWAT unit. Okay, we didn't teach them. Hostage rescue from a bus. I don't think it's offensive tactics.
Yeah, I was gonna say I saw that I saw that video. I was gonna ask you about them. What are some of the things that they already know, and what are some of their vulnerabilities that you can see in training?
Wow, it looks like they are very behind.
Yeah, because it seemed a lot of their movements seemed like it was kind of like, very old, like right. I don't know, yeah.
It's a going back in time to. I felt it's a going back in time to the 80s.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like a Soviet era thing.
Yeah,
that's what seemed like to me. But yeah, I saw some of the stuff you were doing with them. It looked like a pretty cool video.
Yeah, it's amazing. We gave them a demonstration, hostage rescue stuff, and they were very nice and great and really engaged and everything. But I saw that they are isolated. I saw that they're not getting this type of visits by people like me or any other a lot. It feels like they're behind. They're trying to get good training, but yeah. Look, of course, I'm not considering myself a spineless. I'm not considering myself as a spineless guy.
Yeah,
I will never train the other side. I felt that this project, since it's a hostage rescue, and the methodologies are very, very specific to hostage rescue, I didn't feel I'm betraying any of the sides. Definitely not Israel, and I don't think I'm really hurting the interest of America.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, so but if they ask me to do something else, I probably will not be able to do, like, shield bed stuff. Yeah.
But
look, I live in America. I want to be part of you guys, so I need to behave. I know.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure get you back in line. No, I'm playing. Let's talk about Naples, Florida. When you guys are flying around in helicopters, that sounds awesome. That looks awesome.
Yeah, it's more than awesome. It's unbelievable. Until I came here to America and did this seminar, I never flew out of the helicopter that way. It was all the time inside the aircraft. You have like very cool benches that you put on the skates of the helicopter.
Yeah.
So the feeling is like you fly on a motorcycle. Yeah. This is what I felt. And a ventilator above your head give you the effect of the vibration from the rotor. The Little Bird, it's a MD-500 helicopter. It's really, really nice and very, very,
agile, and
it's amazing. His maneuverability is unique, I think, relatively, and it's so fragile. It's so sensitive aircraft, and they carry 4 dudes, so 2 on each skid, and we do hovering above rooftops. We do fast rope. We do jumping to a lake. Okay, so like air casting. Basically using insertion tactics to get on the rooftops of buildings in order to give basically the terrorists the challenge of a 3-dimension challenge, that the SWAT unit that attacks them, or the hostage rescue unit, attack them from the above and from under, basically making them like a sandwich threat. Okay. Now, if you do that together with rappelling from the windows, you can basically create an effect of 360, 3-dimension threat for the terrorists when you come to rescue the hostages. When you decide to do it noisy, okay, when you decide to come with full power.
Yeah.
There are other applications that you sneak to the rooftop without a helicopter to make it silent approach. So in the course, we basically do all of that. We combine the 3-dimension and the rappelling and the assault team members that go from the ground up. We call it Tactical 7. It's basically the world of if you want, hostage rescue as a topic.
Yeah, that's like the first thing I think about, for sure. Yeah,
it's sexy seminar. I think it's very interesting. We're not just doing it with people from SWAT units. We do it also with people that graduate our beginner programs, and we test them to be able to work together with one person, 2-man team, squad, and then the team level. So of course we live fire. So it's all eventually very safe, and even with regular people. You don't have to be special forces guy to do this seminar.
Yeah. So that's actually what I was going to ask is, the training seems so high level. I would think that you would have to be part of a government organization or some kind of special unit to be able to train this. But you're saying if you graduate your beginner course, you can actually do some of this stuff.
Yes, it's our beginner courses are for everybody.
Yeah.
So everybody. Okay, the housewife and the untrained and whatever. But in order to do, and the progression between the level is not immediate and not automatic. But if the student is up to par, we simply get them out there to experience the more advanced stuff. And if it's there already, so it can go to Tactical 7 and do the night vision stuff and the helicopter and rappelling and other stuff. It's very, very interesting program. I think we are the only company in the world that does it. So in that way, it's really stand out. especially when we talk about live fire. Live fire is, as it sounds, very, very, very dangerous. And of course, we apply a very, very strict regime for safety to get the student not just the ability to be safe, but also understanding the big picture regards where your teammates are around you at this point.
Yeah.
Before you do anything. So this is something that that I think it's a very big idea. Yeah, I'm training lately a lot of Army veterans from the U.S. Army.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are in combat roles and other stuff. They telling me that the first time they were using live fire in an urban situation was when they've been attacked by the terrorists or by the guerrilla fighters.
Right.
So this is so definitely live fire. The environment of live fire is a must here in America. The way I see it, there is a gap that needs to be filled. Yeah.
Well, you know what's funny about that is back in the day, like. In the 60s, 50s, and 40s, they used to do the live fire training, but for whatever reason they stopped. I think they were just having too many accidental deaths or something, and maybe they just wanted to stop. But you're right, a lot of that stuff is really invaluable to be able to have the confidence to move around a shoot house or do something, and live fire. So you already know kind of what you're doing. I'm just wondering. I don't know why you would know it, but I'm just wondering why they would switch from live fire to how they train now. And do you think they'll switch back to it eventually?
Look, I think the switch back will not going to happen. The reason is because they can. Mm-hmm. Because they can. There is an alternative, and this alternative for live fire, UTM, ammunition, all the other games, they give the decision makers a very, very easy ground to land on. Mm-hmm. They know if there's going to be something, it's not going to be fatal, most likely, and this is why it's not going to be different easily. But I can assure you that the special units of America also doing live fire is primary eventually, and because there's no other way around it, it's
you have to.
Yeah.
That's one thing.
But look, I cannot compare the level of attention that I'm giving to students altogether about the training and also, of course, safety, but not just safety, to the level of attention that you can get as a soldier in any army, or even not in the Shin Bet. The ratio of you asked about how many students in the group. We have 8 people.
Okay.
8 people in a group. If it's exceeding 8, I'm adding another instructor to help me out. Basically, the training is not a mass production. It's you cannot reach to this level of training with students with a mass production attitude of 30 people on the line, ready, shoot, and nobody knows what the hell they did really.
Right.
Okay?
You have to be very specified, individualized training to be able to train especially with that type of stuff. I agree. Yeah.
So look, I'm not saying that it's not a business, and my colleagues that does it every day, they're shooting 1,000 bullets. Nobody check the quality. So I think we don't shoot as much. There's unlimited bullets in my courses, but I'm shooting with you every bullet, because basically if we phase out from the gimmicks like helicopters and other stuff, mm-hmm. Eventually in the end of the day I'm building up the person to shoot in a crowded situation, right? Live fire. So to shoot in a crowded situation, I'm responsible for every bullet, where it's gonna land. Mm-hmm. And if you don't shoot the enemy, you're doing collateral damage potential.
Yeah.
So I cannot do that on the line with 30 people, ready, shoot 1,000 bullets. Okay, it's not going to happen. You know, I see the videos of my colleagues putting the ammunition boxes. You know, yeah, we're going to shoot now in this weekend 2,000 bullets, and I'm thinking to myself, it's not realistic in a crowd situation. You know, you need to build up people to shoot the one bullet accurate. Make sure it's there all the time.
Yeah.
Most 99% of the time, or 90% of the time. So if you see that some of the video that we do, we're adding tons of non-combatives. So these are really a big problem for a person or a team to distinguish where the enemy is. And also, they need to dig into the deep after the first row of people that were non-combative to find that guy and engage him. And this type of training doesn't require a lot of bullets. It requires quality and safety, operational safety, if you want, to be able not to do collateral damage. This is very much like you can get from an air marshal training.
That sounds
interesting. Same idea. So, right, how you shoot a bullet with a cabin full of passengers. You do it very, very careful. You need to make sure it's there. And so this is if we want to compare our school, so our school develops skills of air marshal compared to, let's say, home self-defense in a farm in Texas that you can shoot wherever 1,000 bullets with machine gun and this guy automatic, okay? Or not automatic. Yeah, this is us.
That's very interesting, man. So, like I was saying, I'm hoping that everyone will come and reach out to you, do take some of your classes, or at least check your website and subscribe to your YouTube channel, because you're doing a lot of good things, and I'm very interested. I might have to go check out one of these classes sometimes. I'm very interested in it, but I want to figure which one I want to do. I'll just do the beginner one just to see what's going on, and then go to the next one. But I'm very interested in it. Tomer, I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on. Anything else you'd like to say?
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about our business and what we do. And good luck with the channel. It looks amazing. You have more subscribers than me, so it's probably good.
That's
probably a good thing.
They're all fake, I think. No one.
No, I don't think so.
I think they're probably all fake. I don't know. Hey, I appreciate it, man.
Thank you, and have a great Thanksgiving.
Yes, sir.